The wreckage was still burning when the Germans reached him. His P-47 Thunderbolt lay shattered across a quiet meadow in northern France, its massive radial engine buried deep in the earth where the aircraft had slammed into the ground. Smoke curled slowly upward into the summer air. Fragments of twisted aluminum glittered among the grass and wildflowers. German soldiers approached cautiously, rifles raised. They expected to find a dead pilot, or perhaps a wounded one ready to surrender. Instead, they found an American standing beside the wreckage. His flight suit was torn open. Blood ran down his forehead. One sleeve hung loose where the fabric had ripped during the crash. When the soldiers shouted for him to raise his hands, the pilot looked at them and laughed. What happened in the next 60 seconds would become one of the most disputed and quietly buried stories of the 8th Air Force. Northern France, summer of 1944. 6 weeks after D-Day, the skies over Normandy had become the most dangerous airspace in the world. The Allied air campaign operated at a relentless tempo. American fighter groups flew 3, sometimes 4 missions every day. Escort duty protecting bomber formations. Ground attack strikes against German convoys. Armed reconnaissance across roads crowded with retreating Wehrmacht units. Below them, the countryside told the story of an army in retreat. Burned trucks lined the highways. Destroyed tanks rusted in roadside ditches. Horse-drawn wagons struggled alongside modern armored vehicles as German columns tried desperately to move east before Allied aircraft found them. During daylight hours, the Allies owned the sky. Any vehicle that moved on a road risked attracting fighter bombers within minutes. Thunderbolts, Mustangs, Lightnings. They hunted constantly, but the Germans had adapted. Across the French countryside, anti-aircraft guns multiplied, hidden inside hedgerows, concealed beside roads, mounted on trucks that traveled with convoys. The dreaded 20mm and 37mm flak guns became the greatest threat Allied pilots faced. German gunners had learned patience. Often they waited silently until American aircraft committed to their attack runs. Only then did they open fire. At close range, when the attacking pilots had no room left to maneuver. The mathematics were brutal. A P-47 diving at 350 miles per hour covered nearly 500 feet every second. A skilled gunner needed only 2 seconds of tracking to fill that path with steel. The Thunderbolt offered protection other fighters lacked. Its enormous radial engine could absorb damage that would destroy liquid-cooled aircraft. The cockpit was heavily armored. But protection was not immunity. Pilots joked about ground attack missions. Some called them milk runs. Others called them murder. Which term a pilot used depended entirely on which patch of countryside he flew over that day. The 358th Fighter Group had been flying these missions for months. Originally based in England, they later moved forward to airstrips in France as Allied forces advanced. By the summer of 1944, they had learned the brutal art of ground attack through experience. Their pilots knew which approach angles minimized exposure. They watched for the tiny muzzle flashes that appeared milliseconds before tracer fire. They memorized the rhythm of German flak bursts. But experience guaranteed nothing. Every mission remained a gamble. The morning of July 27, 1944 began like countless others. Pilots gathered inside the briefing tent. The canvas walls smelled of fuel, dust, and exhaustion. Maps of northern France covered the tables. The day's targets lay south of Saint-Lô, where German forces were attempting to organize defensive positions against the American breakout. Road convoys, rail lines, anything that moved. First Lieutenant William Robert Dunn listened quietly as the intelligence officer described expected resistance. Light to moderate flak. Enemy fighters unlikely. Weather clear. Visibility unlimited. Dunn had heard briefings like this dozens of times. He knew light to moderate meant no one really knew. German flak positions moved constantly. A road that was safe yesterday might become a trap today. But the mission would fly. The war demanded it. William Robert Dunn came from a world far removed from fighter aircraft and burning battlefields. He was born in Minneapolis in 1916, growing up during the hardest years of the Great Depression. Money was scarce. His father worked when work could be found. His mother stretched every dollar until it nearly broke. The family never starved, but comfort was rare. Dunn learned early that survival required toughness, and he possessed that toughness in unusual quantities. Friends remembered 2 traits that defined him: The first was fearlessness. As a boy, he climbed higher than anyone else, jumped farther, and attempted risks other children avoided. The second was a temper that ignited quickly. He fought often, and he rarely backed down. Those traits made him difficult in ordinary life, but they made him perfectly suited for war. In 1939, long before the United States entered the conflict, Dunn traveled north to Canada. The Royal Canadian Air Force was accepting volunteers. They asked few questions, and they offered something the Depression-era United States could not: adventure, purpose, and steady pay. Dunn joined immediately. He trained as a fighter pilot, earned his wings, and eventually transferred to the Royal Air Force as Europe descended deeper into war. He flew Spitfires during the Battle of Britain, becoming one of the first Americans to score aerial victories in World War II. His combat record grew impressive, but so did his reputation. Commanding officers consistently wrote similar reports. Dunn was an exceptional pilot. His instincts in combat were remarkable, but he ignored rules. He broke formation. He chased enemies far beyond authorized limits. He argued openly with superior officers. In short, he was exactly the kind of pilot commanders needed, and exactly the kind that drove them insane. When the United States entered the war, Dunn transferred to the U.S. Army Air Forces. His experience made him valuable. His personality remained difficult. He eventually joined the 358th Fighter Group, flying the massive P-47 Thunderbolt. The aircraft suited him perfectly. Unlike the elegant Spitfire, the Thunderbolt was a brute. 7 tons of engine, armor, and firepower. 8 .50 caliber machine guns capable of shredding almost anything on the ground. It was not graceful. It was built for punishment. And Dunn understood machines like that. By the summer of 1944, he had accumulated enormous combat experience. Escort missions protecting bombers. Ground attack strikes across France and Belgium. Armed patrols over occupied territory. Other pilots described him in contradictory terms: fearless, reckless, brilliant, dangerous, the kind of wingman you wanted beside you in a fight, and the kind of pilot you worried about during formation flying. Some believed his survival proved exceptional skill. Others suspected his luck simply had not yet run out. On the morning of July 27th, Dunn walked toward his Thunderbolt and climbed into the cockpit for another routine mission. Engine start. Taxi. Formation assembly. The familiar sequence unfolded exactly as it always had. He could not know that within a few hours his aircraft would be burning in a French field, and he would be facing German soldiers with nothing but a pistol in his hand. Once a fighter pilot committed to a strafing run, maneuverability stopped mattering. The aircraft that had been built for speed and agility suddenly became predictable. A pilot diving toward the ground had only seconds to line up the gun sight, fire, and then pull away before the enemy's response reached him. German anti-aircraft gunners understood this perfectly. They had spent years fighting Allied aircraft across Europe. By 1944, they had refined their tactics into something brutally effective. The most dangerous moment came after the attack. When the pilot pulled up, after firing, a fighter had to climb away from the target, trading speed for altitude. During those seconds, the aircraft followed a predictable path directly away from the guns that had been tracking it. For the gunners below, that was the moment to fire. The moment when mathematics defeated skill. American losses reflected this reality. The 358th Fighter Group had already lost multiple aircraft to flak during ground attack missions. Replacement pilots arrived, flew a handful of missions, and sometimes disappeared almost as quickly. Veteran pilots lasted longer. But even they knew that luck eventually ran out. The official response was to refine tactics. Steeper dive angles. Multiple aircraft attacking from different directions. Suppression runs against suspected flak positions before the main strike. These changes helped at the margins, but they could never eliminate the danger. Some targets were simply impossible to attack safely. Intelligence officers attempted to track German anti-aircraft positions on maps, but the information was always incomplete. German units moved constantly. A field that was safe yesterday might contain several guns today. A quiet convoy could suddenly become a carefully prepared ambush. Pilots developed their own survival habits. Some trusted speed, making a single high-speed pass and never returning for a second attack. Others relied on terrain, approaching low along hedgerows or tree lines. A few trusted prayer, though few admitted it openly. William Dunn trusted instinct. After hundreds of combat hours, he had developed something many experienced pilots described: a warning feeling, a tightening in the gut, an awareness that something was wrong before the mind fully understood why. Sometimes that instinct pulled him away from attacks that seemed perfectly safe. Sometimes it made him break formation when discipline demanded he stay. It had saved his life before. But instincts are not perfect. And on July 27, 1944, it would warn him too late. The flight crossed the French coastline at 12,000 feet, descending gradually toward the target area. For Thunderbolts flew in loose formation, scanning the countryside below for movement. The signs of German retreat were everywhere. Destroyed vehicles, abandoned equipment, occasional convoys still moving east, hoping somehow to escape Allied air power. Near the village of Canessy, they found one. A column of perhaps 15 vehicles. Trucks mixed with horse-drawn wagons, moving slowly along a narrow country road between hedgerows. Standard procedure called for a reconnaissance pass first. Pilots would fly over the convoy to locate anti-aircraft guns. Then they would return for coordinated attack runs. But something about the convoy felt wrong. Too calm, too exposed. German columns had learned to hide when aircraft appeared. This one kept moving. Dunn felt the warning instantly. That tightening in his chest. The sense that something below was waiting. But the mission required an attack. And Dunn had never been the kind of pilot to hesitate. He rolled the Thunderbolt into a dive. The heavy fighter accelerated quickly. Wind screamed past the canopy. The gun sight settled onto the lead truck. At 1,500 feet, the trap sprang. The hedgerows erupted. Muzzle flashes burst from concealed positions. Tracer rounds streaked upward from fields that had looked empty seconds before. 20mm cannons hammered the sky. Dunn fired anyway. 8.50 caliber machine guns roared. His bullets tore through the convoy, shredding vehicles and throwing dirt into the air. Then he pulled back on the stick. The Thunderbolt groaned under the strain of the climb. Gravity crushed him into the seat. And then something struck the engine. He felt it instantly. A vibration that hadn't existed moments earlier. The subtle wrongness of a machine beginning to fail. His instruments confirmed it. Oil pressure dropping. Temperature climbing. The engine was dying. Standard procedure was clear. Break off the attack. Climb. Assess the damage. Try to reach friendly territory. Dunn ignored the procedure. Instead, he called out the flak positions over the radio. Then he turned the aircraft around and attacked again. Now that the hidden guns had revealed themselves, their muzzle flashes showed exactly where they were. He dove toward one of them. His guns opened fire. German soldiers scattered as bullets tore through the hedgerow. Return fire intensified immediately. Dunn broke away again. The engine was failing rapidly now. He could hear it. Radial engines make a terrible sound when they lose cylinders. Uneven explosions. Metal grinding against metal. The oil pressure needle sank deep into the red. He wasn't going to make it home. The only question left was where he would crash. The Normandy countryside offered few good landing sites. Hedgerows divided the fields into tight compartments. Trees lined every road. Then Dunn spotted a meadow ahead. Large enough. Maybe clear. Maybe survivable. He aimed the dying Thunderbolt toward it, trading altitude for distance. The engine coughed and surged behind him. The landing was controlled, but violent. The Thunderbolt touched down too fast. Its wheels dug into soft ground. The propeller struck the earth and bent backward instantly. The aircraft lurched sideways, then slammed to a stop in a spray of dirt and broken grass. For a moment, everything went silent. The engine stopped. The gun stopped. Even the birds seemed quiet. Then Dunn heard voices. German voices. Very close. He had crashed almost directly beside the convoy he had attacked. The flak crews were only a few hundred yards away, and they were already moving toward the wreckage. Standard procedure again offered clear instructions. Destroy equipment. Attempt escape. Surrender if capture was unavoidable. The Geneva Convention protected prisoners of war. Resistance after surrender was pointless, often fatal. William Dunn had never been particularly interested in standard procedure. He climbed out of the wrecked aircraft. Blood ran from a cut across his forehead, but his arms and legs still worked. His .45 caliber pistol remained in its shoulder holster. That was the only weapon he had. Across the field, German soldiers approached cautiously, perhaps a dozen of them, rifles raised, expecting to capture a wounded pilot. Instead, the American pilot stepped away from the wreckage. looked at them, and began walking toward them. What happened during the next 60 seconds would become one of the most controversial moments of the entire air war over Europe. The German soldiers expected surrender. Everything about the situation suggested it. A downed pilot, a destroyed aircraft, one wounded man standing in an open field. They advanced carefully but confidently, rifles pointed toward the American as they closed the distance. None of them expected him to attack. That expectation lasted only a few seconds. Dunn moved first. The pistol appeared in his hand almost before the Germans understood what was happening. The .45 caliber M1911 was not a precision weapon. It had been designed for stopping power at short range, for the brutal realities of close combat. At the distance between Dunn and the approaching soldiers, its limitations hardly mattered. The first shot cracked across the field. One German soldier dropped instantly. The others froze for a fraction of a second, caught between disbelief and reaction. That hesitation changed everything. Dunn kept moving. That was the decision that saved him. A stationary target is easy to shoot. A moving target, especially one closing distance aggressively, is much harder. His combat instincts, honed in hundreds of hours of aerial fighting, took over. In the air, survival depended on movement, on refusing to remain predictable, on attacking before the enemy could organize. Those instincts translated directly to the ground. He fired again and again. The heavy pistol bucked in his hand. Another soldier fell, then another. The German formation collapsed. Men scattered instinctively, diving for cover that barely existed in the open meadow. A few managed to fire back. Rifle shots cracked past Dunn, snapping through grass and dirt around him. But their response was disorganized. They had expected to capture a pilot. Instead, they were suddenly fighting one. Dunn reloaded. The movement took seconds, but felt longer. Hands trained by repetition slammed another magazine into the pistol. The slide snapped forward. He kept moving. Always forward. Always forcing the Germans to react instead of think. Another shot. Another man down. The entire engagement lasted less than a minute. When it ended, several German soldiers lay motionless in the field. Others were wounded. The survivors had pulled back, regrouping behind the hedgerow where their flak positions had been hidden earlier. They would return soon, with reinforcements. Dunn understood that immediately, and he did the only thing left to do. He ran. The Normandy bocage became his ally. Hedgerows, thick walls of earth, roots, and tangled vegetation, divided the countryside into small, irregular fields. For tanks and armored vehicles, they were nightmares. For a single man escaping pursuit, they were perfect. Dunn slipped through gaps in the hedges, crossed ditches, and disappeared into the maze of narrow lanes and fields. Behind him, German soldiers searched the crash site. Then they spread outward. Patrols moved through nearby fields. But Dunn was already gone. For the next 36 hours, he moved through enemy territory. Mostly at night. During the day, he hid wherever he could. Inside barns, under thick hedgerows, in drainage ditches filled with muddy water. His injuries slowed him. The cut on his head continued to bleed. Fatigue and dehydration made every step harder. But he kept moving west. Always west. Toward the advancing American lines. Local French civilians helped where they could. One farmer gave him water. A woman pointed him toward a path that avoided a German patrol. Members of the resistance network that operated across occupied France guided him through back roads the Germans rarely used. Each small act pushed him a little closer to safety. On the morning of July 29, 1944, Dunn finally reached American forces near the village of Percy. He was exhausted, hungry, carrying wounds that had gone untreated for 2 days. But he was alive. The debriefing that followed lasted hours. Intelligence officers wanted every detail. Where the flak guns had been hidden, what routes the German convoys were using, how patrols were moving through the countryside. Those details had immediate tactical value. But other parts of Dunn's story created complications. The deaths of German soldiers at the crash site fell into a legal gray area. The Geneva Convention protected prisoners of war, but it also allowed combatants to resist capture until the moment surrender was complete. Where that exact line existed was never clearly defined. Dunn had attacked before surrender occurred. From a legal standpoint, his actions could be interpreted as legitimate combat. But the political implications were complicated. American authorities chose a quiet solution. Official reports recorded the crash and Dunn's successful evasion. They did not describe what happened in the meadow. The story spread anyway. Pilots talked. Ground crews talked. The tale of the American who laughed when German soldiers tried to capture him quickly traveled through the fighter groups of the 8th Air Force. In some versions, he killed 9 men. In others, the number grew larger. 60 seconds became 30. The pistol became almost legendary. That is how combat stories evolve. The truth gathers layers of retelling until legend and reality become impossible to separate. What can be verified is simpler. William R. Dunn survived the war. His record included the Silver Star, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and multiple air medals. He continued flying combat missions after returning to duty. Many of the men he flew beside never came home. After the war, he left military service. Like many combat veterans, he struggled to adapt to civilian life. The skills that kept him alive in war, aggression, fearlessness, constant readiness for violence, did not translate easily into peaceful society. He rarely spoke publicly about his experiences, and when he did, the crash site incident received only brief mention. Yes, it happened. No, he did not wish to discuss it further. William Dunn died in 1995, carrying with him the exact truth of what happened in that French meadow. Historians still debate the details. Some consider the story exaggerated. Others believe the original reports understated what occurred. But the deeper truth may not lie in the exact number of shots fired, or the exact number of men who fell. The truth is that war places human beings into situations where ordinary rules disappear. Men fly machines designed to kill. They make decisions in seconds that philosophers argue about for decades. And sometimes survival demands actions that no peaceful society can fully understand. The field where Dunn crashed looks peaceful today. Farmers still work the land. Hedgerows still divide the countryside. But somewhere beneath the soil, fragments of aluminum and steel remain. Pieces of a P-47 Thunderbolt that carried a man to the edge of death and watched him walk away.